Welcome to Candidly Fears. I'm your host, Therese Alexander. Candidly Fears is a space where we have conversations that most people avoid, but the conversations that have the power to change everything. Here we talk about truth, alignment, the decisions, lessons, and realities that shape how we live, lead, build, and grow. Because more money won't fix what misalignment keeps breaking. More opportunities won't fix a lack of execution. And transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens when truth meets action. So, whether you're building a business, rebuilding your life, navigating a transition, or simply becoming the person you're always called to be, you're in the right place. So let's get candid, let's get fierce, and let's begin. So, in last week's episode, we talked about what happens when you lose yourself while building everything else. We talked about identity and growth. We talked about outgrowing environments, mindsets, and old versions of ourselves. I gave you some very personal stories about my life and what happened to me during the pause. So today, I want to continue that conversation because awareness is only the first step. Once you become aware that something is off, you have to make a decision. We talked about that last week as well. You can continue holding on to what no longer serves you, or you can simply choose to release it. And if I'm honest, that's where many of us get stuck. Not because we don't know what needs to change, but because we simply don't want to let it go. Can I be honest with you for a minute? This is another story time. There was a season in my life when I kept asking God for more. You know, I think we all do it. God, please give me more peace, more clarity, more opportunities, more abundance, more growth, more impact, more direction, more stability. I mean, I wanted more in just about every aspect and area of my life. And for a long time, I couldn't understand why these things weren't changing. I mean, I was doing the work. I was praying. I had faith. I was working hard. I was showing up. I was doing all the things that I was taught and that I thought I was supposed to do. But one day I had a realization that made me uncomfortable. I wasn't waiting on God. God was waiting on me. Because while I was asking Him for more, I was holding on to the things that no longer belonged in my life. What things could that be? I was holding on to control, old habits, old ways of thinking, and old versions of myself. And that's when I realized something. Sometimes the biggest obstacle standing between us and what we're praying for isn't what's in front of us, it's what we're refusing to release. I want you to picture something. Actually, you're going to picture me. I know you've seen this image before. You know, the one where there's a child holding a small teddy bear and God is standing in front of them asking for the teddy bear they're holding, but they refuse to let it go. that little girl was me, right? What they and what she or what I didn't realize is that behind God's back is such a bigger teddy bear, a better teddy bear. The very thing they've been asking for the whole time. And every time I see that image, I think about how often we do the exact same thing, right? I just told you that was me. So let me ask you, are you like me? Like, we pray for peace, but we over here, we entertain chaos. We pray for abundance. We're holding on to habits that we know can't sustain the abundance. We pray for clarity while simply avoiding difficult decisions. We pray for healthier relationships while I can say it politically correct, or I could just say it how I feel. We toxic, or we repeat unhealthy patterns. We pray for growth while refusing to become uncomfortable. We pray for more, but we refuse to release. And that's what misalignment looks like. So I keep talking about alignment. If you know anything about Fierce, you know it says I'm alignment over everything. But for a long time, I struggled to define misalignment. Hmm. But today, after research and prayer, I would describe it this way. Misalignment happens when your prayers, your decisions, your habits, your mindset are all moving in different directions. You say you want one thing, but your actions support something completely different. And eventually, you feel it. What do I mean? You feel frustrated and restless. You lose clarity and peace. You keep repeating the same cycles. You know something is off, but instead of stopping, like truly stopping to look at it, evaluate it, most of us just push past it and work harder. We push harder. We pray harder. We force harder. We even try harder. And sometimes, if we really stop and think about it, the answer isn't more effort. Sometimes the answer really is as simple as release. I know this to be true because I lived it. So, as I said, this episode includes another story time. There was a season where I was operating in complete survival mode, meaning professionally, I wasn't leading, I was really reacting. Personally, I wasn't responding. Guess what? I was reacting there too. I was making short term decisions for long term problems. I was allowing my emotions to drive decisions that should have been guided by facts. When I think about it, it's funny because I had the systems, the knowledge, the experience, and the tools. But because I was hurting emotionally, I stopped trusting what I already knew. And that's a hard truth because many times when we're hurting, we abandon the very things that can help us. I know I'm not by myself. I know you too can say that when you're hurting, you stop praying, you stop reading, you stop journaling and planning. You stop doing the simple thing as just trusting the process. Not because those things stop working, but because our emotions become so much louder than our wisdom. And that's exactly where I found myself. I lost faith in the process. I didn't know what to pray for. Everything felt so out of control. And because everything felt out of control, I tried to control everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything: the timing, the outcomes, the process, the people, and the circumstances, all of it. I thought I was trusting God, but if I'm honest, I was trusting God as long as He agreed with my plan, as long as He moved on my timeline. Things made sense, and I could see how everything was going to work out. And eventually, I had to face a difficult truth. One was I was trying to tell God how to be God. The other one was I wasn't surrendering. Another one was, yo, I was negotiating with God. The audacity. And there is a difference. One of the hardest things I had to admit was that some of the things hurting me were also serving me. What do I mean by that? Control, yes, it was hurting me, but it made me feel safe. People pleasing, I have to admit, I was a big people pleaser because it made me feel accepted. Survival mode, yep, that was hurting me too, but it made me feel productive. And because those things were meeting emotional needs, I kept holding on to them even when they were costing me all of my peace. That was one of the hardest realizations of my life because peace was the thing I wanted most. And yet I chose to sacrifice it every day. What do I mean? I was asking God for peace while I was creating the storm. I don't know how many of you all will admit that you create storms in your life and in other people's lives, but I really want you to think about it. Like, I was asking God for peace while creating the storm. Not every storm, but if I'm honest, some of them. And that's where accountability begins. The moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, how am I participating in this? That question changed everything because it forced me to stop looking outward and start looking inward. I began to realize that I wasn't just grieving circumstances. I was grieving that old version of myself that I told you about in last episode. I was truly grieving and missing her. And if you've ever experienced real growth, you understand exactly what I mean. Because sometimes the hardest thing to release isn't another person. It's an old version of you. You know, that version of you that you need to be emotionally mature, but you feel like somebody playing in your face and you want to tell them about yourself. That person. The version that felt familiar. The version that felt comfortable. The version that felt safe, even when it was unhealthy. And nobody really talks about that part. Nobody talks about how growth sometimes feels like grief. Nobody talks about missing the very things you're trying to outgrow. Nobody talks about how familiar dysfunction can feel safer than unfamiliar growth. Hmm. Isn't that something? There's a such thing as familiar dysfunction, and there's a such thing as unfamiliar growth. Trust me, it's real. How do I know? I miss the parts I miss parts of the old version of me. I missed some of my toxic traits. I missed the familiar patterns, not because they were good for me, but simply because they were all I knew. And familiarity often feels like safety until you realize it's costing you your future. That's why alignment is not a destination, it's a discipline. It's not something you achieve once and never revisit. Alignment requires evaluation, constant, and I mean constant honesty, constant adjustment, because guess what? Life changes. Hmm. People change. Seasons change. And if you're not paying attention, it's easy to drift, which brings me to wealth. Because at the core of everything we talk about within the fierce ecosystem, we always have to come back to money, not just money, but wealth. And not just financial wealth, we have to come back to complete wealth. What does that mean here in Fierce? Mental wealth, emotional wealth, spiritual wealth, relational wealth, leadership wealth, and how alignment impacts every, again, every one of them. Without alignment, it's harder to build, it's harder to lead, to grow, to sustain, to maintain peace, to maintain healthy relationships, and to steward opportunities, because a misalignment creates resistance and alignment creates flow. Let me tell you, not perfect flow. Hmm. The flow is not even easy, but it's an intentional flow, the kind that allows you to move forward without abandoning yourself, the kind that allows you to lead instead of react, the kind that allows you to build from peace instead of panic. So before we close today, I want to leave you with one question. What are you still fighting to keep that God has already told you, yo, you gotta let it go? Hmm. Is it a mindset? I bet you it's a habit. If I think hard enough, maybe it's a fear or that relationship, a pattern, a job, an identity. Or maybe you're like me and it's an old version of yourself. Whatever it is, be honest. Because the truth is, God can't bless what you're refusing to release. And every level of increase requires a level of release. Maybe the answer isn't found in what you're missing. Maybe the answer is found in what you're holding on to. So, thank you for joining me for another episode of Candidly Fierce. If this conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you something to think about, make sure you follow, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. And until next time, stay fierce. See you later.